The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was enormous. It was built from black stone and silver light, floating somewhere between three stars that had no name in any human language. 7 platforms hung in the air, each one holding a representative from one of the 7 most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. Their voices echoed. Their robes moved like water. They had been meeting in this hall for over 2,000 years, and in all that time, not one of them had ever truly been afraid. Today, they were not afraid either. Today, they were simply annoyed. The council had called this session because of humans. It always seemed to be because of humans lately. In the last 40 years, humanity had pushed outward into space faster than any species the council had ever recorded. They built colonies on worlds that belonged to no one, or at least, worlds that humans said belonged to no one. They built weapons that violated 7 separate agreements. They expanded like a flood, quietly and quickly, and every time the council sent a warning, the humans smiled, nodded, and kept building. The head of the council, a tall gray creature named Vorath, spoke first. His voice was low and measured, like a judge reading a sentence. He said that humanity had been warned enough times. He said that the colonies on the border worlds needed to be emptied. He said that Earth's new weapons needed to be destroyed. He said that humanity needed to accept a council overseer on their home planet, someone who would make sure the rules were followed from now on. Then he said the words that changed everything. He said that if Earth refused, the council would move to full military action within 30 days. The other 6 representatives voted. All 7 raised their hands. It was unanimous, clean, simple. The council's official emissary was sent to Earth that same hour, carrying a sealed message with all 7 signatures on it. The message was polite in its language but clear in its meaning. It was, in every real sense of the word, a declaration of war with a deadline attached to it. The human government received the message. They read it in a cold, bright room with too many people in it and not enough answers between them. Ministers argued. Generals looked at each other. Someone said they needed to negotiate. Someone else said there was nothing left to negotiate. A third person said they needed to find her. Nobody in the room said her name out loud. They didn't need to. Everyone knew who they were talking about. The moon was called Ori 9 on official maps. It had no real weather, just a thick gray fog that rolled in from the frozen plains every morning and stayed until dark. There were maybe 200 people living there, mostly engineers and miners who kept to themselves. It was the kind of place you went when you wanted the rest of the galaxy to forget you existed. She had been here for 6 years. Her name was Inha. She was sitting at a wide metal table covered in old star maps and printed battle reports when Dowen walked in. He was a tall man, lean and quiet, with short dark hair and eyes that always looked like they were doing math. He had served under Inha for 11 years before her exile, and when she was sent away, he had quietly followed. Nobody had ordered him to. He just went. He walked to the table, set a small data chip down next to her coffee, and stepped back. She didn't look up immediately. She finished reading the line she was on, then picked up the chip and held it under the small light above the table. She read slowly. Her face didn't change much. One eyebrow moved slightly, and her jaw tightened for just a moment. Then she set the chip down and was quiet for a long time. Outside, the fog pressed against the small window above the table. The room was warm and dim. An old heater clicked somewhere in the corner. Dowen stood with his hands behind his back and waited, because he had learned long ago that she always had something to say, and it was always worth waiting for. She picked up her coffee, took one slow sip, set it back down. At last, she said quietly. Her voice was calm, not excited, not angry. It was the voice of someone who had been sitting by a door for a very long time, waiting for a knock, and had finally heard it. Dowen said nothing, he just watched her. She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the fog moved in slow gray waves across the flat ground. There was nothing beautiful about this moon. There never had been. But she had chosen it for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with the view. "How long have we got?" she asked. "The message gives Earth 30 days to respond," Dowen said. "But the government already knows they can't fight this alone. They'll come to you within the week." 4 days, she said. "What?" "They'll come in 4 days, not a week. They're already scared." She turned from the window. "Who are they sending?" "Rian." Inha almost smiled at that. Rian was their best diplomat, sharp, fast, and clever enough to know when cleverness wasn't enough. Sending Rian meant the government was serious. It meant they had already run out of other options. "She'll want terms," Inha said. "Yes." "She won't like mine." "No," Dowen agreed, "she won't." Inha looked down at the star maps on the table. Her eyes moved across them slowly, tracing lines between systems, between fleet positions, between the things she had been building quietly in her head for 6 long years. The council had made this decision in a clean, polished hall between 3 nameless stars. They had voted with calm hands and confident voices. They had spent maybe 2 hours deciding to go to war with humanity. She had spent 6 years deciding what to do when they did. She reached down and moved one of the old maps aside. Under it was a thick document, handwritten on real paper, with a title at the top that the government had once called dangerous, irresponsible, and deeply alarming. She put her hand on it gently, like it was something she had missed. "Wake the others," she said. "Tell them it's time." Dowen turned and walked to the door. Before he reached it, she spoke one more time, still looking down at the document. "And Dowen." He stopped. "Tell them I'm not angry." A quiet pause. "Tell them I'm ready." He nodded once and left. She stood alone in the warm, dim room, with the fog outside and the star maps under her hands. And for the first time in 6 years, the long waiting finally felt like it was over. Rian arrived on the 3rd day, not the 4th. Inha had been wrong by 1 day, which almost never happened, and she noted it without expression and said nothing about it. The shuttle landed on the flat frozen ground outside the small cluster of buildings that made up Inha's base. Rian stepped out wearing a dark coat and no expression on her face, which was the look she always wore when she was trying to hide the fact that she was nervous. She was a lean woman with sharp eyes and short black hair that she kept tucked behind one ear. She had once talked 3 different alien governments out of a shooting war using nothing but a dinner table and 4 hours of conversation. She was one of the best in the business. She had still asked twice on the shuttle ride whether this was really necessary. Dowen met her outside and walked her in. He offered nothing, said little, and brought her to a small side room with 2 chairs and a table between them. He told her Inha would come when she was ready. Then he left Rian alone in the room with a cup of tea that was already going cold. Rian waited. An hour passed. She drank the cold tea anyway. She looked at her notes on her small device and rehearsed what she was going to say. She had prepared 3 different approaches, the respectful one, the urgent one, and the one where she appealed to Inha's old sense of duty to Earth. She had ranked them in order of what she thought would work best. She had a feeling none of them would work at all. Inha came in quietly. She didn't knock. She just appeared in the doorway and then sat down across from Rian without ceremony or greeting. She was wearing plain gray clothes, her dark hair pulled back, her face clean and rested. She looked in every outward way like a woman who had been living a calm and simple life. Nothing about her looked dangerous. But Rian had read her file. Rian had read her file 3 times on the shuttle ride here. "You look well," Rian said, because she needed to start somewhere. "You look tired," Inha replied. "How bad is it?" Rian set down her device. There was no point in the slow approach. Inha would see through it in about 30 seconds and it would only waste time. "The Council is moving 7 combined fleets into position along our outer boundary. We've confirmed at least 400 warships. Our own fleet is strong." but we've never fought all 7 at once. The simulation teams say we lose within 5 months. The optimistic ones say 8. She paused. We need you. I know, Inha said. The government is prepared to offer you full reinstatement. Your rank, your clearances, your command. I don't want reinstatement, Inha said. I want the war. Rian stopped. What does that mean? It means no committee reviews my decisions. No minister gets to pause an operation because it makes them uncomfortable. No one pulls me back when I'm in the middle of something because the council sent another polite message asking us to talk. Inha leaned forward slightly. I make the calls, all of them, from the first move to the last. You give me the war and I give you the win. Those are my terms. The room was quiet for a moment. Rian had expected demands. She had not expected them to be this clean and this total. The government won't like that, Rian said carefully. I know, that's why I'm telling you and not them. Inha sat back. You understand what I'm asking and you understand why. The government exiled me because my methods scared them. And now the council has done exactly what I told everyone they would eventually do. I need you to walk back in there and tell them the price of their own fear is that they don't get a vote this time. Rian looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, if I take this back and they agree, and that is not certain, you will be responsible for everything that happens. Yes, Inha said simply. People will die. People will die either way. The difference is whether we win or lose while they're dying. Another silence. Outside the building, the wind moved across the frozen ground in a low, steady sound. Rian looked down at the table, then back up. I need to know something first, she said. Before I take this back, I need to understand why the council is actually afraid of you. Not the official reason, not the treaty violations. The real reason. She hesitated. What did you do 6 years ago that scared everyone so badly they'd rather exile you than keep you? Inha was quiet for a moment, then she told her. 6 years ago, a minor border conflict had broken out near a small colony called Perrin 5. 3 council warships had moved in to pressure the colony into surrendering its mineral rights. Earth sent 2 frigates to respond, small ships, lightly armed, meant to show presence rather than fight. The council ships opened fire without warning. One of the frigates was destroyed in the first 30 seconds. Inha had been a senior fleet commander at the time, stationed 2 systems away. She redirected her ship without orders, arrived at Perrin 5, and in 11 minutes had reverse-engineered the council ship's own weapons grid using the destroyed frigate's final transmission data. She turned their targeting system against them. All 3 council warships were disabled. No council crew members were killed, but every ship was crippled beyond repair. After the battle, she did not file a standard incident report. She filed the Horizon Doctrine. It was a full war plan, not a defensive strategy, not a response protocol, a complete detailed plan for how humanity could end any future conflict with the Council permanently, not by destroying them, but by making humanity so structurally, technologically, and strategically powerful that attacking humans would be recognized by every civilization in the galaxy as an act of suicide. The plan called for things the government found deeply uncomfortable. Embedded intelligence operatives inside every council civilization. Weapons development that went far beyond any existing treaty. Preemptive disruption of enemy supply networks before any war was even declared. And a final clause that said, in plain language, that the goal was not peace through goodwill, but peace through the complete certainty of devastating consequence. The government had read it, gone pale, called it dangerous and irresponsible, and exiled her within the week. Rian listened to all of this without interrupting. When Inha finished, the room was very still. And in 6 years, Rian said slowly, have you been sitting here doing nothing? No, Inha said. Have you been building it, the doctrine? Inha looked at her steadily. Go back and tell them yes or no. I don't need anything else from you. Rian stood up. She picked up her device, tucked it under her arm, and looked at In-ha one more time. She thought about the 400 warships on the outer boundary. She thought about the simulation that said 5 months. She thought about the government sitting in that cold, bright room with no answers. "I'll be back in 2 days," she said. "I'll be here," In-ha replied. Riyun walked out. The door closed behind her. In-ha sat alone in the small room for a while, her hands flat on the table, looking at nothing in particular. She was not nervous. She was not excited. She was the same steady, waiting thing she had been for 6 years. But the door had been knocked on, and she had finally answered. Riyun came back in 2 days, as she said she would. She walked in without the nervous look this time. She sat down, put both hands on the table, and said 4 words. They agreed all terms. In-ha nodded once, stood up, and walked out of the room. That was the end of the conversation. Within 6 hours, the small base on Ori 9 changed completely. Ships that had been sitting dark and cold in the covered hangars were powered up one by one. Doan moved through the base, giving quiet instructions to people who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The engineers who had been living here for years, working in silence, building things that had no official name and no official approval, started moving their equipment out of storage and into active status. In-ha stood in the largest room of the base, which had been set up as a full command space, and looked at the people around her. They were not many, maybe 30 in total, but they were exactly who she had chosen, and she had chosen each of them for a very specific reason. Junho was there. He was young, younger than most in the room, with a thin face and quick eyes behind plain glasses. He was the one who got nervous around In-ha the most, which was strange because he was also the one who had built the most terrifying things she had ever asked for. He stood near his workstation holding a tablet and trying to look calm. Sara was there too. She was a small woman who moved like she weighed nothing and spoke in a voice so quiet you had to lean in to hear her. She commanded Earth's Black Ops division, though that division officially did not exist. She had short hair, a plain face, and the kind of eyes that made you feel like she had already read everything you were about to say. She had been running silent operations inside 3 of the 7 council civilizations for the last 4 years. Nobody in any of those civilizations knew her name. In-ha looked around the room at all of them and spoke plainly. She said the council had made a decision in a polished hall between 3 stars. They had voted to go to war with humanity. They had done it calmly and confidently because they believed, after years of watching humans, that they understood what humans were. They had seen the ships. They had counted the weapons. They had run their own numbers. She said the council had made the mistake of calculating what humanity could do. They had not calculated what she had already done. She turned to Junho first. He had been with her since the 3rd year of her exile. She had found him through a mutual contact, a young engineer who had been quietly let go from Earth's official weapons program after he kept pushing for developments that the program director called unnecessarily aggressive. In-ha had read his proposals. They were not unnecessarily aggressive. They were simply 10 years ahead of what anyone else was willing to build. She had brought him to Ori 9 and told him to build everything he had ever wanted to build with no restrictions and no review board looking over his shoulder. He had spent 3 years doing exactly that. The most important thing he had built was what he called, very simply, a jump disruptor. It was a device, able to be mounted on any mid-sized ship, that could send a targeted pulse through the fold space that faster-than-light travel depended on. If a fleet was mid-jump and a jump disruptor fired at the right frequency and angle, every ship in that fleet would drop out of jump simultaneously, in random locations, with their systems temporarily scrambled. In open space, far from any fuel source, a fleet dropped this way was not destroyed. It was simply stranded. Stranded fleets did not fight wars. They called for rescue ships and burned through their power trying to figure out where they were. Junho had tested the disruptor twice, on unmanned ships, in deep empty space where no one would notice. Both tests worked perfectly. He had told Inha the results in a flat, quiet voice, and then immediately asked if he could sit down because his legs felt strange. She had told him to sit down and then told him he had done very well. Now she stood in front of him in the command room and asked him if the production units were ready. He nodded. 20 disruptors had been built and were already loaded on ships in the hangar. She told him to prep 10 more, just in case, and he went immediately back to his station. Then she turned to Sora. Sora had been working in the dark for 4 years. Her people were embedded inside 3 council civilizations, the Veth, the Graal, and the Sunori, under false identities, in positions close enough to power to hear things that were never meant to leave those rooms. They sent reports back through a communication chain so layered and encoded that even Rion's intelligence division had never detected it. The information Sora had gathered over 4 years was, in simple terms, extraordinary. She knew the Council's largest fleet formation, their most powerful combined force, was scheduled to make a jump through a specific corridor in neutral space within the first 2 weeks of the war. This was their plan to arrive quickly at Earth's outer boundary from an unexpected direction. The jump would take approximately 9 hours. In the middle of that jump, in the darkest and most isolated part of the route, they would be completely unreachable by anyone. That was exactly where Inha planned to strand them. Sora also knew something else, something quieter and more useful. 3 of the 7 council civilizations had been arguing with each other behind closed doors for years over territory that had nothing to do with humans. The Veth and the Graal had a border disagreement that was old and deep and bitter. The Sunori believed the Graal had cheated them in a trade deal 14 years ago. These things had been politely set aside when the council voted to move against humanity. Sora had been nudging them, very carefully, very slowly, feeding each one information, true information, slightly shaped, that kept the old bitterness warm. One well-timed revelation at the right moment could crack the Council's alliance from within. Inha looked at Sora and said, "When?" Sora said, "Week 2. Inha said, "Make it week 1. Sora nodded without any visible reaction and went back to her station. Doan stood at Inha's side through all of this, watching the room organize itself with the efficiency of something that had been rehearsed many times. He had watched her build this for 6 years. He had seen the early plans on paper, then the first test results, then the slow, careful placement of people and tools in exactly the right positions. He had watched it all come together the way a very long and patient construction project finally shows you the building it was always going to be. "They think they've started something," he said quietly, standing next to her as the room worked around them. "They think a lot of things," Inha said. She was looking at the star map on the main screen, her eyes moving across the Council's fleet positions, the jump corridors, the political fracture lines between civilizations. That's been their problem from the beginning. She reached forward and touched the screen, drawing a slow line between 2 points, the corridor where the Council's largest fleet would jump, and the position where 3 of Junho's disruptor ships would be waiting. "They declared war," she said, more to herself than to him. "They spent 2 hours deciding it. They signed their names and felt certain." She looked at the map. "I've been deciding this for 6 years." She stepped back from the screen. "Begin," she said. The room moved. The Council expected a slow war. That was the honest truth of it. They had studied humanity for years. They had watched how humans organized, how their military responded to pressure, how long it took their government to make decisions. They had looked at every conflict Earth had been part of and built a model that said the same thing every time. Humans were capable, humans were clever, but humans needed time. Time to mobilize, time to agree, time to stop arguing with each other long enough to actually move. The Council had 400 warships on the boundary. They had supply lines stretched across 6 systems. They had a plan that was solid and reasonable, and had worked against 4 other civilizations in the past 200 years. They had given Earth 30 days to respond before the first shot was fired. They did not expect anything to happen on day 4. On the 4th day of the deadline period, before Earth had officially given any response at all, the Council's largest combined fleet, 260 warships from 4 different civilizations, began their long jump through the neutral corridor. The jump was 9 hours. It was the most ambitious single movement of the Council's military in decades. When it completed, the fleet would arrive at Earth's outer boundary from a direction that human sensors would not expect, cutting off 2 of Earth's main supply routes in a single stroke. On hour 5 of that 9-hour jump, every single ship in the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the same moment. Not one ship, not a section of the fleet, all of them, 260 warships, scattered across 300,000 kilometers of empty, unnamed space, systems scrambled, engines cycling down, communication arrays confused and searching for signals that weren't there. 3 small ships that no one had seen, running without transponders, had already come and gone. The fleet spent the next 18 hours trying to figure out where they were. Then they spent another 12 hours trying to reach the Council for rescue coordination. By the time the Council understood what had happened, the fleet was 31 hours behind schedule and had used 40% of its fuel reserve just keeping its systems running in deep, empty space. They did not make it to Earth's outer boundary. The Council called it a technical failure at first, because the idea that humans had developed something capable of doing that quietly, ahead of any declaration of war, without any warning, was not something their analysts were prepared to accept. It took them another day to accept it. By the time they did, Inha had already moved on to the second operation. In the 3rd week, Rian stood in a glass-walled room on Earth and watched 2 Council diplomatic channels collapse within 6 hours of each other. The first was between the Veth and the Graal. A recording appeared, origin unclear, officially untraceable, of a high-ranking Graal commander making comments about Veth territorial rights that were deeply offensive by any standard of Veth culture. The recording was authentic. It had been made 14 months ago in a private meeting, and the Graal commander had said those things because he genuinely believed them. He had just never expected anyone outside the room to hear it. Sora's people had been in that room. Within 4 hours, the Veth had recalled their ambassador from the Graal home world. Within 6 hours, the Veth's military attaché to the Council Joint Command had quietly stopped attending coordination meetings. The second collapse was subtler. A series of financial documents appeared in the Sunori public record, documents showing exactly how the Graal had structured the trade deal from 14 years ago, including internal notes showing that the Graal negotiators had known the deal favored them significantly and had deliberately steered the Sunori representatives away from noticing. The documents were real. They had been buried in the Graal's own archive system for over a decade. Sora's people had been in that archive too. The Sunori did not recall their ambassador. What they did instead was quietly stop sharing intelligence with the Council Joint Command. They stopped contributing to the fuel redistribution that was supposed to support the stranded fleet's rescue operation. They began having long private conversations with their own military that they were not reporting upward. The Council's alliance had 7 members. Within 3 weeks of the war's beginning, 3 of those members were focused less on fighting humanity and more on watching each other. On the ground, or rather in space, Inha moved her actual military forces in a way that the Council's remaining fleet commanders found deeply disorienting. She did not mass her ships. She did not hold a line. She moved in small, fast groups, never staying anywhere long enough to be targeted, hitting supply points and communication relays rather than warships. Every time a Council commander positioned their forces to respond to one threat, the threat was already gone, and 2 smaller problems had appeared somewhere else. One Council commander, a decorated veteran named Osren, sent a private message to the Council leadership on day 18 of the war. It was later recovered and read by Inha's intelligence team. In it, Osran said that he had fought 6 wars in his career and had never encountered an opponent that seemed to have already read every response he made before he made it. He was not far wrong. Doan managed the tactical map from the command center, and every move the council made had already been anticipated in some version of Inha's 6 years of preparation. Not because she could see the future, but because she had spent 6 years studying these specific civilizations, their specific commanders, their specific tendencies under pressure. She had read every recorded conflict they had been part of. She had built a picture of how each of them thought. She knew that Veth commanders became aggressive when confused. She knew that Graal commanders pulled back to defensive positions when their supply lines were threatened. She knew that the Sun-Nori prioritized protecting their own ships above all other tactical considerations. She used all of it. On day 22, the Council issued its first ceasefire request. The message was formal and calm, and worded as if it were an equal negotiation between 2 parties. It said the Council was willing to discuss terms. It said there was no need for further escalation. Inha read the message and set it aside. The next morning, she hit 3 more relay stations along the Council's main communication corridor, cutting their joint command's real-time contact with the stranded fleet, which had finally been partly recovered, but was now running on emergency power by 60%. The Council sent another ceasefire request the following day. This one was less calm. Doan brought it to her personally. She read it, put it face down on the table, and looked at the map. "They're scared," he said. There was no satisfaction in her voice when she answered. There was nothing warm or triumphant. She simply said, "Good," and circled the next target on the screen with one finger. Then she looked at him with steady eyes. "They should have been scared 6 years ago," she said. "They should have been scared when they exiled me instead of listening to me. They should have been scared when they voted with their clean hands in that clean hall." She looked back at the map. "Fear now is the only thing they have left that's useful." She picked up her pen. "Get Sara. We're moving on the Sun-Nori separation tonight. If they're going to fracture the alliance, I want it done publicly and loud enough that the other 4 can't pretend they don't see it." Doan went to find Sara. Inha stayed at the table, alone with the map and the night, the way she had been alone with her plans for 6 quiet years on a cold and foggy moon. Except now the plans were not on paper anymore. Now they were burning across the galaxy in real time, and every star on the map was a problem she had already solved. The war ended on day 41. Not with a great final battle, not with a last desperate push from either side. It ended the way a structure ends when you have removed enough of the supports underneath it, not with a dramatic crash, but with a slow and certain collapse that everyone could see coming and nobody could stop. By day 30, the Sun-Nori had formally suspended their participation in the Council's Joint Military Command. They issued a public statement that was careful in its language but clear in its meaning. They said they were reviewing their alliance commitments in light of recent information. They said they were not enemies of humanity. They said nothing about the Graal, but everyone in the galaxy who could read between lines understood exactly what they meant. By day 35, the Veth had done the same. Their statement was shorter and angrier in tone. They mentioned, without specifics, that the terms of the original war vote had not been fully honored by all parties. Their ambassador to the Council joint session had left the building and had not returned. With the Sun-Nori and the Veth effectively gone, the Council's military structure became something very different. What had been 7 civilizations acting in a coordinated way was now 5, and 2 of those 5 were watching the other 3 with increasing nervousness, wondering what information might surface about them next. Inha did not hit them harder in those final days. She did not need to. She simply kept moving, kept pressing, kept being present everywhere and settled nowhere, and let the fear and the fractures do the rest of the work. On day 40, the council's head, Vorath, sent a message directly to Earth's government. It was not a ceasefire request this time. It did not use polite treaty language. It was short, and it simply asked what humanity's terms were for ending the conflict. Rian brought the message to Inha personally. She set it on the table and watched Inha read it. "They want terms," Rian said. "I know what they want," Inha said. She folded the message and set it down. "Tell them to come here." Rian blinked. "Here to Ori 9. "No, to the ship." Inha stood and picked up the document that had been sitting on her table for 6 years, the thick, handwritten pages of the Horizon Doctrine, worn at the edges now from being read and set down and read again. "Tell all 7 representatives to come in person, not delegates, not junior staff, them." Rian stared at her for a moment. "Vorath will object to that." "Let him." Inha tucked the document under her arm. "And tell him that if even one representative refuses to come, I will take that as a refusal of terms and continue operations." She walked toward the door. "They called a vote in that hall of theirs. I'm calling one on mine." The meeting was held on Inha's flagship, a long gray vessel called the Hiyo, which had no decoration on its hull and no ceremony in its corridors. The 7 council representatives arrived by individual shuttles and were escorted by Sara's people to a plain meeting room near the center of the ship. There were no ornate chairs. There were no refreshments. There was a long metal table, seats on both sides, and lighting that was functional but nothing more. Vorath arrived last. He was tall and gray and still managed to carry himself with the posture of someone who was accustomed to being the most powerful being in any room. He looked at the plain walls and the metal table, and his expression shifted just slightly, the first small crack in the composure he had maintained for 41 days of losing. Inha walked in from the opposite side of the room and sat down across from him without speaking. For a moment, no one said anything. The 7 representatives sat on one side. Inha sat on the other, with Doan to her left and Rian to her right. The document sat on the table in front of her. Vorath spoke first. He said the council was prepared to discuss a return to the original terms, humanity, withdrawing from border worlds, submitting to some level of oversight, with guarantees of safety for all human colonies in council-adjacent space. He spoke for 4 minutes. He was composed and reasonable. He used the word mutual several times. When he finished, Inha looked at him for a moment without expression. Then she opened the document on the table and slid it across to him. "These are the terms," she said. He looked down at it. He read the first page slowly, then the second. His posture changed as he read, not dramatically, but the room felt it. One of the other representatives leaned over to read alongside him, then another. The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. Vorath looked up. His voice was controlled, but the control was working harder than before. He said the document was not a peace agreement. He said it read more like a takeover. He said the clause requiring all 7 council civilizations to permanently share military and technological intelligence with Earth was unprecedented. He said the clause giving humanity full veto power on the council was not something any species had ever been given. He said the clause declaring any act of aggression toward any human target to be an act against every species under council protection was an extraordinary overreach. He said with great care that these terms were an act of domination. Inha listened to all of it. She let him finish completely. Then she folded her hands on the table. 6 years ago, she said, your council called my plans dangerous. You said my methods were irresponsible. The government I served was so afraid of what I was proposing that they exiled me to a moon in the middle of nowhere, rather than keep me around and have to think about the questions I was raising. The room was very still. And then, she said, after 6 years, you declared war on us anyway. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You spent 2 hours voting. You signed your names and felt certain. You pointed 400 warships at our boundary because you had calculated what we were capable of and decided the calculation was in your favor. She looked at Voreth steadily. What you did not calculate, what none of you accounted for in all your years of watching us, was what I had already done. She let that sit for a moment. You called my doctrine an act of domination 6 years ago. You call it an act of domination today. But I want you to think carefully about what you are actually sitting across from right now. I'm not the most powerful person in humanity. I'm not the best of us or the most loved or the most representative of what humans want to be. She paused. I am what humans become when you make us wait long enough and afraid enough and angry enough. I am not humanity at its best. Her voice was quiet and even. And I am sitting across from 7 civilizations that could not defeat me. Voreth said nothing. No one in the room said anything. These terms are not a punishment, Inha said. They are a structure. They are the architecture of a situation where no one in this galaxy ever again believes that going to war with humans is a reasonable calculation. She looked down the row of representatives, one face at a time. Sign them, and this ends today. Every ship goes home. Every stranded fleet gets rescue support from us. Every border colony stays where it is with full legal protection. She looked back at Voreth. Refuse them and I continue. And the thing you need to understand about me, the one thing that is absolutely true, is that I have more patience than you do. I have had 6 years of practice. The room was quiet for a long time. Then one by one the representatives looked at the document. One of them picked up a pen, then another. Voreth sat still the longest. He looked at the table. He looked at the document. He looked at Inha. He picked up the pen. Rian watched it happen from her seat at the table and felt something she could not quite name. It was not exactly pride and not exactly relief. It was something older and quieter, the feeling of watching something inevitable finally arrive. Later, standing in the corridor outside while the representatives were escorted back to their shuttles, she stood next to Dowen and said nothing for a while. She's frightening, Rian said eventually, not as a criticism, just as a fact. Yes, Dowen agreed. He said nothing else. Inside the meeting room, Inha sat alone for a moment after everyone else had gone. The document was gone. It would be filed, recorded, sent out across every channel, made official in every language that existed in the known galaxy. What had been handwritten on paper in an exile 6 years ago was now the law that governed the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. She looked at the empty table. She thought about the fog on Ori 9. She thought about the long, quiet years, the maps, the dark hangars, Junho's nervous face, Sora's quiet eyes, Dowen standing in every doorway she had ever walked through. She thought about the knock she had been waiting for. Dowen appeared in the doorway. He was holding 2 small glasses. She looked at him. He walked in and set one down in front of her, then stood across the table. She picked it up. Now, she said softly, looking out at nothing, they'll never forget what humans are capable of. She took a sip. The galaxy, for the first time in 2,000 years, was afraid of exactly the right thing. And somewhere far away, in the polished hall between 3 nameless stars, the seats of the Galactic Council sat in silence, and one of them, for the first time, belonged to Earth.